and welcome to the Fintech Finance Virtual Arena. Today, we're going to be talking about ISO20022 and a huge innovation in payments going forward. So joining me, I have Fraedrich from Deutsche Bank and Edward Ireland from Bottomline. Guys, thank you very much for joining me today on the Virtual Arena. It's brilliant to have you both. And to kick things off, I kind of want to do a round robin and get you guys to introduce yourselves to me and your audience. So with that in mind, Christian, could you give us a bit of background to yourself and your role at Deutsche, please?
Sure, thanks. So Christian Fraedrich, I'm responsible for cash business architecture within the corporate bank of Deutsche Bank. And within this role, I'm responsible for the ISO20022 migration project globally. So enabling our core clearing hubs where we offer the intermediary bank business, but as well all the other branches of Deutsche Bank where we offer cross-border payments to our corporate clients locally. So a big endeavor, and I'm happy to participate in today's discussion on this important topic.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. And Edward, could you also give us a bit of background to yourself and Bottomline, please?
Yeah, thank you, Doug. Yeah, so my name is Edward Ireland. I work in our product management team at Bottomline. I'm the program lead for ISO20022 for Bottomline. I've worked for 20 years in financial services across payments, securities, treasury, and currently working with Bottomline on the ISO20022 program and our product management team. We're a leading provider of technology solutions in the market, and we have a program in place now to move over 450 customers across to ISO20022 over the next couple of years.
Absolutely brilliant. Where is the time where this innovation is just becoming ever more critical, and so that's absolutely brilliant to hear. Now, with that in mind, before we crack on and talk about ISO20022, I want to really maybe take a kind of round robin about the state of payments before. So Christian, if I come to you first, when it comes to payment modernization, what have been some of the biggest advancements you've seen that have happened for the banks?
Well, there are multiple things which have changed over the last couple of years impacting payments. Particularly for cross-border payments worth mentioning is everything which has happened around Swift GPI, which provided for the first time in the industry a real end-to-end transparency and the ability to trace cross-border payments from their initial instruction until the credit to the beneficiary account. And this not only provides transparency to the ultimate customers, but it as well helps to streamline investigation and exception handling processes within banks, and with this drives efficiencies. But there are other things as well in the same regard, which have been recently introduced and are still being worked on, like services of pre-validation. I think an issue which every customer doing cross-border payments is well aware about, that payments may not be executed because information is missing or information is wrongly provided. And with this pre-validation service, you get the information right at the front. And when we look broader than just cross-border payments, I think one of the biggest advancements in the past is the introduction of instant payment schemes, and for the first time, real-time and immediate execution on 24/7. And now, just recently, and what we talk about today, the introduction of ISO20022 as one single standard for payment execution. And I think here the biggest advantage for banks, which we are yet to implement and to benefit from, is that there is one standard for instant payments, for bulk payments, for domestic payments, as well as for cross-border payments, which will really provide benefits for banks and their customers, because at the end, you don't need to think about what type of payment you're executing. But it's more important, what is the SLA associated to this payment? So how fast should it be executed, or what are you willing to pay?
Yeah, I think that's going to be so critical. Having that bottom line is really going forward going to be huge. And speaking of, then, I guess, Edward, if I could bring you on, do you agree with Christian when it comes to finding that innovation and also getting to that deadline point?
Yes, I do. Yeah, and when I think about what's changed in the market and what's driving this, I mean, to go a bit further on ISO, it's important to remember ISO20022 has been around since 2004 or so. So it's not a new standard. It's been around for a long time. It's now widely accepted as it's going to be the standard for payments. There's no dispute about that. That's what's going to happen. And I think it's been proven in the market as well. So remember, the two largest countries in the world, India and China, are already using ISO20022 for payments domestically. So that's proved it comprehensively. One of our major markets, Switzerland, moved to ISO in 2015 in Europe. Again, it's been very successful there. It's been successful in the funds space as well, in terms of automating the funds business. So it's a proven standard, and I think that's one of the things that's important to understand about it. There are a number of other drivers, I think, that it's worth calling out as well, in terms of what's sort of helped to advance payments and get us to this point where everybody accepts that there's going to be a move to ISO and a change and an improvement in the way that payments are done. You know, I think that electronic payments, for example, took a while to become accepted. I spent quite a bit of time in the Middle East in the last 10 years. And, you know, just even selling the concept of electronic payments in the beginning there was a bit of a struggle. So it's something now that's widely accepted. Customers have accepted it. The technology that's available for institutions and individuals to make electronic payments is hugely improved, and that supports the move and the acceptance of it. And also, that then becomes an expectation from customers as well. And so to Christian's point about end-to-end visibility through things like GPI, that's something that nobody would have expected to have got in the past. And now people see that they can get it and they can accept it, you know, and this 3-day turnaround on a payment, again, that used to be very acceptable, especially in the UK, you know, people would accept that it would take 3 days as if a payment mysteriously goes somewhere for a while and then pops out a whole while later. GPI has shown us that the majority of payments can settle in minutes, and that's normal and that's accepted. So I think those are some of the things that have changed.
Well, that's really interesting hearing how, you know, it's almost like a cultural change because of the technology, you know, being able to now accept that visibility and that speed is so critical. And we're seeing that obviously with what Swift have been doing. But can I ask then, Edward, if I stay with you just for one more question then, how do you think ISO 20022 goes beyond Swift's MT?
It goes a long way, not just beyond Swift's MT, but any of the other legacy standards. You know, if you look at the BACT standard 18 standard that's used in the UK, for example, these standards were developed in the 70s and they supported the payment business then, it worked for the payment business then. But what you can do now, what has come into the payment space between the 70s and now, and what the expectations are in the future, can be supported by ISO 20022. So it's much more granular, much richer data, much more definition of different business elements that can go into the messaging. So I think what we'll see with ISO 20022 is richer data, better end-to-end processing, more structured information, which is really important because we don't have a lot of structure today. And also it's going to enable the payment to become part of the wider transaction as well. And I think that's a really important point.
Interesting. Now, speaking of that increased data, Christian, if I could come to you, and you've discussed quite a broad sense of the innovations that have happened when it comes to payments. But one thing that keeps popping up is that increased payment visibility. Can you tell our audience a bit more about that, what that means at Deutsche and specifically for your customers?
Well, first of all, it helps the customers in their backend processes when it comes to higher visibility. So as Edward mentioned, it's not that you initiate the payment and then you wait 3 days and don't hear anything, but you have the immediate visibility throughout the execution. I think what is important that it doesn't go without other technical enhancements, which we see. One thing is we need to think about new ways of communicating with our customers. So API, as one of the buzzwords, is clearly something which is of importance to get not only the visibility, but get this real-time information back to the customers, that they don't only experience almost a real-time execution, but they get as well real-time information on the execution of the payment. I think which goes in line with the introduction of cloud-based services like Swift has done it as part of the GPI, right? That we have a central place where those information is available, where we can pick it up as banks. And I think what we see in the future, and what at least for cross-border payments is of big importance and will as well hopefully support the ISO 20022 migration, is the recent announcements of Swift around the transaction manager platform, which they aim to introduce. And again, it's providing a central place where you have all the information around a payment stored. It provides immediate access to this information, which then can be provided immediately back to your customers. And it provides, again, a much better way of tracing payments throughout their lifecycle, from the introduction at the ordering party to the credit at the beneficiary party.
Interesting. Now, we've talked about that kind of cultural shift because of the innovation and the speed of payment. So, Edward, if I come to you with this first, and then Christian, I'll jump back with you. But I mean, why do you think that financial institutions have had to increase the speed of adoption of ISO 20022? Despite the postponements, and as you said, it's been around for quite a while now. Why is there now this sudden ramping up of pace of change, really?
Yeah, so I think there are probably two drivers that I see. I mean, obviously there'll be more, but I'd call out two of them mainly. The first one is customer expectations. So I think that the customers' expectations from what they can get from the payments from their providers is driving the providers, the banks, the payment service providers to adopt ISO 20022 in order to support those expectations. So they can't meet the expectations of their customers on the legacy standards. So that's one major driver that I see. And the second is the requirements that they have around processing and to provide that visibility. So technically, I don't think that the old standards really support what the banks need to do. When we look at things like the fraud monitoring and the sanction screening that payment service providers are required to do and needs to do well and efficiently, that just can't be done on the old standard. It needs to be done on better data, and better data comes from using ISO 20022. So I think there's an operational driver within the organizations to use better formats, and then there's a customer expectation that's driving better visibility, more granular information, which again needs to come from those standards.
Interesting. And Christian, would you agree that it's really become a shift of the whole industry from those standards that are causing this ramping up?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, as Edward rightly pointed out, there are a couple of things which are driving the adoption of ISO 20022 and which makes it so important to really start working on it and not delaying it. There is the rich and structured data, which helps a lot of processes within banks and helps as well our customers. And Edward mentioned the compliance processes around sanctions and embargo filtering and money laundering monitoring greatly will benefit from more structured data. Any type of exception handling process will greatly benefit from the availability of structured data. And in the first place, because we assume that the straight-through processing rates will go massively up, since there is less room for interpretation compared to the legacy MT standard, where there wasn't any kind of structure or only very limited structure. And then obviously it's the client benefit, right? It's the richer information which can be provided together with the payment instruction. Just think about data fields which are not yet supported in cross-border payments, like the ultimate debtor and ultimate creditor parties, things like which are supported in local domestic schemes and corporate customers are very much used to, but which they can't use as of today in cross-border payments and which will be available going forward. So there are multiple drivers, but I think the core theme is really the richer and much more structured data which ISO 20022 provides and which will help banks to overcome many of their issues which wouldn't be possible with the legacy format.
Interesting. Now, with that, I mean, it sounds incredibly important to achieve this, especially for your customers, as you've said. But I imagine maybe the migration is more complex, Christian, than a lot of people would say. I mean, a lot of people, it would sound quite easy for them to just say, well, we should migrate. But actually, is there a lot going on beyond this, behind the surface, behind the scenes, that a bank needs to kind of work on to get compliant?
Yeah, completely. So I think what we must not forget is that the migration to ISO 20022 is not a message format change, which one could say, I just change my interface to SWIFT or to whatever local clearing system is changing, but it impacts the end-to-end process. And if you really want to get the benefits out of the ISO 20022 migration, you need to change all your systems along the value chain. So you need to update your processing systems in order to cope with the extended data and to really make use of it in order to support straight-through processing. You need to update the systems by which you provide statements to your clients in order to give them the benefit of the richer and structured data in the account statements, which they ultimately get. And all of this must not be forgotten. And then it's about training and operational readiness within the institution. So it's not only about a technical change, and as I said, not only a technical change in the interface, but in all the different systems, but as well making the people ready, that they understand that. So many of them have worked with the legacy format for quite a while, and I think it's not only a significant technical change, but it's as well a mindset change what ISO 20022 brings. The interoperability is something which we need to consider as well, right? Not everybody is migrating at the same pace. Swift is migrating in November 2022. The Bank of England has introduced the like-for-like approach earlier. Target 2 is migrating. So all this adds additional complexity, which must not be forgotten when thinking about the ISO 20022 migration.
I think that's a really interesting point you make, because it keeps bringing up this almost cultural element to the whole migration. It's not just a technology, it's not just that something you can implement. It's actually the whole company needs to move with it, really. And with that in mind then, Edward, there seems to be maybe a lack of education, I don't know if that's fair to say, around the migration. Especially considering that it's coinciding with the EBA's Target 2 plans. There's a lot going on when it comes to just the very payments infrastructure. So, I mean, what can organizations do? What can financial institutions do to start increasing this education around the migration?
Yeah, so it's a very good point. I mean, so some great work being done in the market about what ISO is and understanding what the format is, and Deutsche Bank have done some really good work in terms of educating the market there as well. So in the discussions that we have with customers now, I think everybody has a pretty good understanding of what ISO is. And so the big question, as Christian alludes to, and you just asked, Doug, is about, well, how do I move to ISO? So not so much what is it, but how do I move? And so you've got a technical challenge, and then at the same time, from a business perspective, and when you're looking at just the cost of doing it, is what's the benefit from doing it as well? What advantages can I get from this? Is it just something that we have to do, or can I actually get some benefit, give more to my customers, and get some business benefit from this migration as well? You talked about, and Christian talked about as well, about different timelines as well. So we get into a really complicated space with, Bank of England moving a little bit before Target 2, Swift moving into a coexistence period, whereas other market infrastructures having a hard cutover onto the new standard. So you're in a really complicated space there. And sometimes institutions have taken the view that, well, I'll wait until I have to do something. So the point at which I move is the point at which I have to move. And until I have to move, I'm not going to do it. I'll carry on with what we've got today, and I'll keep working with my customers and supporting them in the same way that I do. Then when we have to move, we'll make that migration. But actually what we're saying to customers is, don't allow yourself to drift into that coexistence period. Don't allow the project to extend out and out and out and out until you absolutely have to do something. Move to ISO 20022 when you can, as soon as you can, and start taking advantage from it, because you're not going to get all the advantages from ISO 20022 on day one, because we don't fully appreciate everything that we can offer to the customers using that standard. We don't have all the answers. We don't have all of the great new business ideas available to us today. These are going to come to us over time as we learn about what our customers expect and what they want. But we've got to have the building blocks in place in order to do that. So get over onto ISO 20022 as soon as you can, and then start adding in these great new business and customer experiences on top of it once you've got it in place. But you can't do that until you've got it in place. So put it in and get the migration started as soon as you can.
It's interesting you say, it's almost, we've talked about the challenges so much that actually there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of benefits that just come around with it. But without almost sounding too demure, I want to ask again, maybe if I come to you, Christian, it's a really hard balance, this. But so with new payment products like Swift UPI, ISO, Visa B2B, we've seen the industry around payments and the culture around payments change dramatically. Now we're seeing payments go instantly and visibly. How can banks prevent fraud at the speeds these services now operate at?
Well, it's a very, very good question, and I think it's a big challenge for the entire industry. But again, and don't want to overstress the benefits of ISO 20022 as a standard, but what definitely helps in this regard is structured data. And when you think about filters in order to prevent fraud and filters in order to prevent any type of sanctions and embargo breaches, it tremendously helps the better the data quality is which you get into your processing. And ISO 20022 is definitely the right way towards this. And it enables then in a second step as well, the application of new technologies, artificial intelligence, big data screening, whatever you have in mind in terms of buzzwords only works when you have a proper data pool based on which you can execute those measures. And this will only come with ISO. So this is a big challenge, but with the migration towards a new standard and with the introduction of structured data, it will as well become easier for banks to identify fraud and to apply the respective measures. Interesting.
And with that increase in data, if we talk more about ISO and cross-border, I mean, what is it going to mean for cross-border payments going forward, along with all these other payment products?
Well, I mentioned it at the beginning. I think one of the benefits of, and Edward alluded to it as well, is of the ISO standard is that it's a well-known standard, and it's not only a standard for cross-border payments, but it's used in domestic payment schemes, it's used for instant payment schemes. So I think one of the biggest benefits ultimately is that all the different payment schemes come together, and you don't ultimately shouldn't talk about a cross-border payment versus a domestic payment, but you just talk about a payment, and as I mentioned, about the SLA which you attach to it, right? So what is your time of speed you want to get it executed? Because from a customer perspective, and I think this is the most important point which needs to be stressed, the biggest customer benefit is that they have one type of standard in which they can instruct a payment, and then the bank has with ISO 20022 almost the flexibility to execute it in the most appropriate way. And I think this is how we should think about cross-border payments in the future, that it's coming together with all the other payment schemes and methods which we have based on one single standard.
Interesting. So it is almost this just unanimous change across the industry-wide standard change. So I mean, Edward, would you agree with that? Is this just one part of a greater scheme to improving payments as a whole, rather than differentiating between cross-border and domestic payments?
Yeah, I think that differentiation between cross-border and domestic is diminishing. It's not, it's not such a big deal whether something is cross-border or domestic now, particularly in adjacent markets. ISO 20022 is a standard. Obviously, it has meant that the way that the payment data is structured in the different markets is the same now. So it's not, you're not having to convert from vastly different formats when moving from one market to another. And we've seen some great initiatives in the instant payment space, where we've got payments being settled between Singapore, Australia, and faster payments in the UK. This is happening cross-border seamlessly. So it's already happening. We've seen ongoing initiatives in the Euro payments area to harmonize the settlement between different countries. And we're now getting to the point where with TIPS and RT1 that we've really got a single instant payment network in Europe now. So cross-border there. P27 in the Nordics, we're seeing, that we've got a single ecosystem there for instant payments across border in those countries and those participants. So there's so much going on there, and it's showing that using the technology and ISO 20022 being a driver, that we can have seamless cross-border payments near real time.
Absolutely brilliant, guys. I think that's all we have time for, but thank you so much for your insight, because it really does seem like the industry is coming alive and really just updating itself at such a brilliant speed. So thank you very much for your insight. And to all our viewers, thank you very much for watching. You can catch the rest of the series and much more over at www.fintechf.com, and of course YouTube and LinkedIn, where I'll see you then. Thank you very much and goodbye.